All right, without further ado, put your hands together for Jeffrey.
Hello. Sorry about that. I feel that was like a advertisement for Advent Health. They do such great videos. It's amazing. So thanks for everyone for coming today. I know it's always hard. I'd rather actually be at the pool myself. But you do get a CEU credit, so I think this is great. So my name is Jeffrey. My background is really diverse, so I think what I want to do is, for those who haven't met me before, I see a lot of familiar faces, which is great, because me being here with AIA, I actually say that AIA actually almost helped start my career, It was actually working with a lot of the architects in Orlando and Miami and in Florida in general that actually helped launch my career. My background is diverse. So I started off at the Art Institute Chicago. I went to landscape architecture is where I really got my career started. Worked for a firm called EDSA. Actually, my first job was with SOM in Chicago, working in the planning department for them, working for EDSA, and then I started my career in 2008. During that time, while I was doing landscape architecture, when I first started my career in landscape architecture, I was still working with numerous firms all over Central Florida, doing sort of landscape and art sort of ideas together. Lots of things at UCF where I was actually building things in the landscape. And then, I don't know if you guys remember Casa Decor back in 2008 in Miami. I don't know if anyone's from Miami. That was where I was doing I was breaking out. I was doing a lot of these different sort of installations getting published. And that's when I had my incident at the Delona Hotel. Where I had the heart attack. This is a box that I drew up, and it's hard to see from back there, but typically what happens is when we get grown up, we're actually put in a box, right? These are like, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And so people stick you in a box, right? And for me, it's like, it was never about staying in that box. It was really about this idea that all of us in this room are designers, or even artists in general. It's just a title, right? I don't know if this clicker's not working too well. But if you look at these sort of contemporaries, right, like Noguchi and Maya Lin and Frank Gehry, like they sort of crossed other boxes, right? They're not only doing buildings, but they're doing fashion, they're doing site furnishings and industrial design, Philippe Starck. And so there's a precedence for all of that. And then really what happened is, I don't know if you guys knew who Virgil Abloh, God bless his soul. He was the guy who I met back before he exploded, and he was someone that started Off-White, and then whoever thought that he'd become the lead designer for Louis Vuitton, right? So this idea that industries and brands are starting to look for designers and collaborations is really something that I was looking at. In Orlando, I was always doing that as well. Like, we had a place called Blank Space. I don't know if this is the right model for everyone, but I got a beer and wine license. Sell beer and wine at night after 5 o'clock, and then we had events. But really it was an idea of having installations and giving free space to artists, because everyone was always charging artists for gallery space. And then I did a lot of competitions, and then even work with Calatrava I did the landscape master plan for Polytech, and then also worked on Stream Song with Alfonso Architects. So I still continued working with architects all over Florida on these really interesting projects, and then in 2008 I had this, which is funny because my mother took this photo. She said, one day you're going to use this photo, which is kind of funny. And where was I going to get a job? So essentially, as an artist, what do? Like, you can't go and start all over at 35 when I had my heart attack and start doing these like shows for galleries and museums and stuff like that. And this whole thing, 10 years ago, almost 15 years ago, started coming out with this 1% for art. So all the ordinances for public buildings started indicting a method of 1% for any government building to go towards public art. And it was a way for me to submit something and do blind design competitions without being judged based on my RFQ, right? It was really based on what I had done. And in my first year, I was fortunate. I applied for 12, and I won 8 in my first year. And I was the fastest emerging artist to break the $1 million mark in public art in my first year. I said, Mom, no, I'm not a millionaire. It's like, the way I describe it, I'm a design build contractor. So if I build you $1 million house, I'm not going to spend, $1,000 and pocket, $999,000, right? So, but just like in general, you'll try to make 10 to 20%, and I use that to kind of reboot sort of my art career. And but what I did though is I started noticing that cities, because of the ordinances, they had to get, in order to get their CO, they actually had to get the art installed. So there was so much art that was going on so fast that there was no real plan of doing it. And so all suddenly there's a lot of these plop art things. They're almost like these tchotchkes that you would see in buildings and all that stuff. So what I did is I convinced cities to say, okay, don't put art on every single building, but if you could tell me what is your total number of municipal buildings you're building in that certain year, take that 1% of all those buildings combined, and let's do something that's memorable, that becomes a postcard to your city, that helps economic development. And that's really why I'm here to tell you about this idea of economic development in art. So when I go through these slides, I didn't do these, obviously. But what I'm showing you is I don't have to tell you where any of these projects are, right? You already know. What I didn't say is what the city is, right? And that's what I've been helping with cities, is actually helping create sort of these icons that then help define their cities. It's sort of that postcard that you know. And it's interesting because Las Vegas is doing it. They're taking all these icons and putting them on the cities. And then also, China is copying everything. So I don't know if you know, China has their own bean, their own Eiffel Tower, their own Statue of Liberty, their own London Bridge. And so there's this desire for cities to figure out what their definition is. And I'll get back to this, that the idea that when the bean was created in Chicago, which ironically, which is interesting, because my first job as an intern at SOM was actually doing what's that word? When you go out there and you as-built of an old rail yard across from Michigan Avenue that eventually became the master plan to Millennial Park. So I was already getting the itch about how public art can be integrated. And then these are projects in San Antonio I won. This Beam of Light in San Antonio. I think the coolest thing about this is when TNT and the San Antonio Spurs play, they show the Alamo, the Riverwalk, and then this Beam of Light. And it's very similar to when you see other major cities and their sort of sports teams and commercials, they sort of look for that definition. Like, I don't know how many times the bean is shown when you watch Chicago sports teams, right? And then I started getting into sort of working with developers, and this is Tavistock in Orlando. It's called Lake Nona. This is the existing garage that was as built. The owner asked me, Mr. Lewis, to put a sculpture on the corner of the garage, and I said, there's nothing I could do to hide that ugly parking garage. I don't think you guys, anyway, actually don't know who did this, so sorry if you're here. But what I asked for is I said, well, how much is it? And I said, okay, not only 1%, but just tell me what the cost of the precast is, and I'll do an alternate, I'll do an equal substitute for the precast for the aluminum cup metal. And what I did is I created this idea of the beacon, which is really a stethoscope, because it's based in Medical City. So you see what I've done is I wrapped the stairwell into this cylinder, and then created this binary code wall that you see here. So that's sort of the before and the after as part of that. And then we have 4 projectors.
World-class public art to our community.
And the whole piece serves as a vessel or canvas at night for digital artwork. I would call it a live painting. So I've got 2 projectors that are inside the hotel, and then 2 that are in the office building. And when I say value added, what happened is in year 2 is that the lease rates on the office building and the prices of the rooms in the Marriott flipped. Everybody wanted garage views, you know? So the idea that you're creating something out of nothing and there's an additive value there is great. And then people rent it out. So they have weddings, they have people rent out that public space in front of a garage. And the best thing is that just like in these other icons, like the Eiffel Tower, and where these moments are created, that bottom right photo is actually someone proposing in front of the garage. I mean, it's a garage, right? So, but it made something special, a moment that they had there, and it's something that is interesting that you create in these different cities, are these memorable ideas. So you could tell that little bottom left, you could see that stethoscope shape, and then that round serpentine is really the cord in the head, sort of the headpiece, and the two planters serve as the earpiece. So there's a lot of innuendos in terms of simple design issues in here. The banding in there is actually, it's not evenly spaced because it spells out Lake Nona in barcode. And then the ones and zeros all translate to different messages about the mission statements of the residents of Lake Nona. And then I did this giant dog sculpture, which is starting to become my icon. I don't even own a dog, but it's just everybody loves this dog. It's the #1 selfie thing in Lake Nona, So the litmus test of how good your artwork is doing is just going to Instagram and just seeing and Googling and tagging these things and seeing what are all the images that come up. Because when you go on vacation, we all look up of where do people go to go see. And this is a sculpture for Advent Health. And then I became the garage guy. I mean, so the next garage out there is based on Braille. So instead of Braille where it's tactile, the Braille still has the languages of the circles, right? So that spells the alphabet. So it's the same mission words that you see in the binary code garage that's in here. And so that's sort of the Braille garage. And then this is it finished, so, which is kind of cool. It's interesting because you can see what the holes are, where the big portholes are, that's like a space bar. So between each of those is a word. So that's sort of why those holes are there. And also I had to learn about CO2 emissions and how to emit 20% of emissions on each single floor. So I also had to work with engineers to figure out how the art can actually accommodate that stuff. Sorry, I did this cool James Bond kind of has that James Bond scene. So, and then the next garage we're looking at is Morse code, so the dashes and dots, and then starting to integrate. So the interesting thing about this development is that when you come to Lake Nona and you see these big white boxes of sort of languages, those are garages, right? And then the architecture everywhere else can just be whatever it is, and this becomes the same sort of common nomenclature of sort of the development. So the interesting thing about this is when I started getting invited back to my homeland, the Philippines. And I brought the same technology to them with the projection mapping. In the Orlando exhibit, we had 100 people with wine and the mayor and all this. We had 3,000 people come to this opening. When you zoom out, it's just giant rice fields. And this is sort of these people never go to Vegas or anything, but it brought more value of what I was doing in terms of just simple public art components in cities. Because when I started going back to the Philippines and started working for these, it's still a third world country. So I'm working with these haves and have-not of these giant developers. I said, if I'm going to do anything, I need to do something that's rural in the community. I don't know why it's out of order, but this is actually in Miami. Anyone been to the design district? So these are in the design district. These are based on fruits. This is for Craig Robbins. I said, imagine fruits that are falling from a tree become planters and seeders. So that's like a coconut, an avocado, a pear. And then the coolest thing of how good your work becomes is when all the influencers and the cover shoots that all happen around your sculptures, right? So people find these things, right? I think media and all that stuff really look for interesting ways to integrate with not only art, but design in general, right? Back to the Philippines, this is a series of sculptures that became wayfinding elements for a mall. So on the top, these were national sort of animals of the Philippines, the carabao, the tarsier, and from the front, it looks like a series of slices that you would see like in, and then from the side, you can actually see it, and then you ask the owner, and like his first time he ever did art, and he's like, how are they doing? You go to hashtag SMAura, which is the name of the development. It's not in front of, most of the photos are not in front of Zara or H&M. It's in front of one of these 5 sculptures that I did that I'm not going to copy anywhere else, right? So it becomes their brand as part of it. And then the interesting thing is like, brands and magazines look at that stuff, that litmus test of what's everyone hashtagging. And so I was fortunate to be on the cover of Philippine Airlines as part of that, which was great, which is now interesting because now I'm doing collaboration with them. So you'll actually see large Boeing, the LA flight and the New York flight with a Jeffrey wrap on the big Boeing plane. So that also is another way to collab where I'm doing that as well as the trays and then even the stewardesses' outfits, you know? So it's sort of like the whole sort of aesthetic about that. So the Philippines loves me. So this is called Heaven's Gate. This is in my homeland where my father is. I started going to where all my family members are. And St. Pete is named after the patron saint. So he's actually the holder of the gates to heaven. So I actually got everybody's name that lived in that village and put their name in this sculpture. And so it's 1-inch metal that goes, it's shaped like a book open on its cover. And the hardest thing was convincing the engineer to not put any bracing on it. Because it has to sustain typhoon category. But that's the brilliant thing about this is working with an engineer that found that out by the spacing of the openings as well as the angle of deflection and the... So that was kind of a very cool project. The interesting thing about that is that I put a sign there that says, if your name is not on here, it's based on the national census, it doesn't mean you're going to heaven, that's between you and God, because people are coming to me and like, my name's not on here. So then I started moving into larger scale. And it's working with folks like Expedia and these other big brands. The way we make them is I start off with a computer model, a hand sketch computer model, and then we make a clay model. The reason for the clay model is that the computer model, when you zoom in and no matter if you use Grasshopper or whatever tool, there's always triangulations as part of that, right? And then what we do is we 3D scan the clay model, and then we make a 1-to-1 hard foam model. So that 1-to-1 hard foam model to the left, I don't know if you see me there in the second story of it. We take individual stainless steel sheet metal. It's all like old hand-forged welding, where we're banging it like a sword, and we're banging it around the form of it, tack welding it, and then removing it, each one, labeling each one, removing it, removing the foam, building the internal structure, because foam's not going to hold up to hurricane, reattach that, and then seam weld it, and then polish it. So those are all the kind of the steps we go for this. There's one that's on top of the building. This was kind of the honor the hard BPO workers, the call center workers, that whenever you guys call someone on Expedia, it's either Filipino or India. It's the 2 national brands. And then I was just there to see it get dedicated last month, so you could see sort of how big it is. So it's like 9 stories tall. So it's interesting because everyone that's driving along that major highway says, "Oh, that's it's called Bayani and Pag-asa, which means hero and hope." Orlando International Airport, another competition. I went up against Janet Eckelman and Alex Aycock. Janet's the one who did the St. Pete Pier with the things, and then my idea was this idea of all us Orlandoans who are never from here. Actually, a lot of Florida people are not here. But the idea, so I do storytelling in a lot of my videos, and I'm not going to show you the beginning part, but the consensus is this boy, I hired actors. Imagine having that, submit that pay app to the architect that you're working with on that. But the idea is that these couple would come, this boy would come, he would have a bucket list of going to Disney, but then he also would write other things like going to Winter Park, going to these festivals, and discovering other parts parts of downtown, and then eventually saying that, you know, he wants to go to UCF. The idea that they come here to find dreams, and then they can come here and make dreams come true. And so what has happened is he makes this paper airplane with sort of his bucket list that he's finished, and then he throws it. It's kind of goofy, but this girl picks it up. They both grow up, and they realize that he found his bucket list, and that they end up going to UCF together. And so the concept is this 60-foot fiberglass paper airplane, the boy throwing this paper airplane. And so the idea that he's looking to achieve his own dreams, but this idea that he's making other people's dreams come true. But this is what you would see when you're driving up to the terminal, when you pick people up. So you have those suitcases are maybe 20 feet tall, so you actually go into the suitcases. Sorry, everyone needs a slow-mo. So the idea is that you get your bags from the baggage claim, and then you go up these stairs, and then you're immersed into this giant LED screen world that shows all the great things that are happening in Orlando. And then you realize you're actually in the suitcases themselves. And then using projection mapping, like a lot of my other projects on that. And then this is where I was invited to do my Points of Connection exhibit at the Orlando Museum of Art, which was mentioned earlier. It was based on a series of these poems or haikus that you would walk through. These are 10,000 pounds of rice, white and brown rice. It's arranged in the 13 stripes of the US flag. To kind of create this idea of this journey between the continents. And then I did a series of these rice paintings, and then these were the hardest thing to ever get, are stents. It's not like I can go to CVS and get a bunch of stents, so I work with Advent Health to procure these. We actually, they had to watch me inflate them, because sometimes these things go to the black market. But these are hard to get. These are essentially things that you would put in your body. These are things that open your vessels to allow blood flow if you have blockages. So I have 4 stents in my body. I have triple bypass, and I still have heart disease. So I take 12 pills a day, and then and these are stents inside of these flowers to kind of show this idea of a mechanical device opening a natural device, very similar to what's going on, in my body. Everyone tells me I should make these into NFTs. And then I just collect all my medicine bottles. So for the last 10 years, these are all my medicine bottles that I've been collecting to kind of show what I'm putting in my body. 57,000 pills, the amount of pills I put in my body in 10 years. Just to kind of show what it looks like. I think a lot of people say this looks like a lot of our medicine cabinets. We just don't save them, right? And then the reason for the box head. So for me as a public artist, my figures are all based on this idea that cities are composed of all these great emotions, like love, joy, peace, happiness. And the boxes that you see on the heads are really buildings. And when you put the bottom of the boxes on a horizon line, it's what makes a great skyline, or all these emotions combined together. So that's what the reasoning for the box series. And then the greatest thing is that you make some small ones. You can see here love, joy, peace, passion. This is now over going to the Philippines. I'm going to have the first solo exhibit in the Philippines, in the Met Manila. And then we're like, okay, let's make a big one. So this was just dedicated, called Time. They just love parties over there, I'll just tell you. So the interesting about this, it's the idea of time. So the mission here was to create a clock tower. And so this idea that you're looking at time on traffic, and the value of time is sort of what I want to remind people about. And then once again, if you do really good work, then people copy it. So these are already on the black market on the street. And then this is a piece that is untitled because it relates to this idea of a lot of people have different opinions on what this position means. So you scan the QR code and you really type it of what it means to you. And so this allows for public opinion to have this happen. This was acquired by Richard Branson. This is sort of One Love. You go in there and you scan your eyes, and then your eyes are part of the sculpture. So it reminds us that during the COVID days where we were watching looking at everyone in their masks. And then these heads relates to all the travels in the world and the idea that we're all the same. And even though we talk different languages, you actually go inside of it. You scan the QR code and it plays that language in the head. And it was great because we had performers come out and do performances with it. We did some native dances as part of it. And then the idea that social media and how it works. So OMA, this was their highest rated exhibit they've ever had. They had 37,000 ticketed visitors, the most they've ever had in history, although they've got some negative press lately. But I was under the first administration, just so you know. And then I did a series of these astronauts for Richard Branson that was for Virgin. So Virgin has a series of musical artists. So I was asked to do something for Coachella and said no, but because I had an opportunity just to be the solo artist for this musical event that you see sort of these astronauts. It's hard to see, but it's called Meteor Shower. There's actually projectors that project meteors on the umbrellas as part of that, and they're all small astronauts that are small, medium, and large. So it gives this idea that we're all really into space right these days. And then finally the Jacksonville sculpture. How many people here from Jacksonville? So in general, the way this is I'll play the video. So I was on the Perkins and Will team. They asked me to be part of this. The criteria was to design, it was 4 criteria. The landscape architecture for the park, the urban design component to it, the hotel, how would you arrange the hotel, and then the iconic sculpture. And obviously I was part of the iconic sculpture. So is anyone from Perkins and Will here? Okay. So the beauty about this is that when the selection committee came about, it was actually live. And the judging scoring was live. It was actually great. You could actually hear the scores. So the first team would get like 17 points on the first category. We would get 16. The next one would be 15. We would get 14. And the third one was 12, we get 11. So we were 3 points behind going into the last category, which was my thing, which is the art. I got 20 points, next team got 9. And even in the selection committee, they said, that the artwork put us over the top to win the competition. I was telling Workins, they got like a $2 million design fee, and I'm still fundraising for my project. But I said, hey, give me a finder's fee, give me something, right? But if it's, anyone knows where all the shipyards is located? So it's the shipyards, the design of the park. They had just had an RFP for the hotel, and I don't know if you guys saw it, Bjark Ingels with a private developer submitted. It was a really cool, classic kind of curvilinear design that came into the sculpture itself. And the way I presented this is that I was saying that the artwork is inspired by, and this is really a controversy where everyone's, where did the artwork come from? But it's really 3 things. The idea that it's this idea of reflecting the St. Johns River, and that the St. Johns River really is the history and the holder of memory of the progression of the history of the city. And so I had this sculpture come out of the river in terms of its history and create a series of 3 elements: an anchor, a heart, and this idea of an infinity symbol that talked about Jacksonville being an anchor city, the love of the city, and the idea that the infinite amount of memories that it's holding together. But if you arrange them all together, then they look like different words, I guess, right? Love, I love Jax, and then everyone's favorite, Lerp, Derp, Lex. I mean, there's so many. But the reasoning for the positions and the heights is they all have a meaning. So 151 feet, why 151 feet? Divided by 12 inches is 1822 when Jacksonville was founded. And then the reasoning for 310 linear feet of the sculpture is because that's the length of the St. Johns River, you know? So everything in there has a meaning and purpose as part of it. And then we also, you know, integrated this idea of a water feature, you know, you've seen the sort of the pixelization where you could type in your names as part of that. So when the Jacksonville Jaguars play, this will be the thing that you see the most. And so for me, it was really about not doing just an art piece, it's really about doing an icon that you would see similar to other cities as a public art. But I was thinking about not only public art icons, like you see like the Bean and the Vessel, and even the Wall Street Bull, but looking at it at a larger scale, like the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe, and looking at it at scale in terms of where you would see it with other national icons, you know? And so for me, it was really about putting us on the national stage. And it was funny because one of the selection committee members said, look, I never heard Paris, Singapore, Rio, London, all named in the same sentence with Jacksonville, right? So if we can do that, that would be great. And when you look at these sort of skylines, I didn't really have to tell you where these skylines are. Like, you know, unless there's a specific archetype there that's very well known, it's really the icons that helpfully define cities in terms of its postcard moments, right? You know where these things are. But if I showed you this, you wouldn't know where that is, right? But if I put this in there, eventually people will know that's, you know, Jacksonville, you know? And that's why I was looking at that scale. And we're all this idea of helping define skylines and iconography, and this idea that maybe one day there'll be a Jackson at Las Vegas Boulevard, right? And then, you know, not to get into merchandising, but, you know, the idea that it's easily translatable, and also, okay, costs, right? Everyone's like, $18 million, that's so expensive. But, you know, for 151 feet by 310 feet, the Bean in Chicago was 25 million. And the Vessel in New York is 200 million. So even though it's a lot of money, this is how it gets paid back. It's really through this idea of sponsorships and brands. And that's really where my career exploded, is that when you look at the billboards on the highways, each of those things are valued at like $200,000 a year per advertiser. The biggest industry out there is advertisement. That's why you see these brand deals with sports teams, when NBC and all that stuff. It's all in advertising. And if I could leverage that, that's sort of how these sculptures pay themselves. So Millennium Park, $25 million to make that. If you build it, they will come. You know, someone told me Kevin really didn't say this, but it's from the same movie. But what it means is CloudGate had an annual visitation rate of like 12 million followers. After that happened, if you look really closely, it changed to AT&T Plaza, right? So someone came in there, just said, hey, I want to put my name on this plaza because of all the selfies that I'm going to get from this in Instagram as part of that. And then what happens is when you have something that iconic, everything else around it starts happening. So then you had the Crown family, you had Boeing, you had Chase, you had McDonald's, you had BP, you know. You couldn't do this on a park in Orlando, or, you know what I mean? Like, you couldn't get these brands to come in and say, hey, can you put your name on a park, right? Unless there was something iconic, because they all look at visitor ratings, right? So the idea, there's a math behind this. And obviously, I got a lot of publicity. You guys got a lot of publicity on it. And this was great, you know. So all the memes that happened as part of it is just part of it. You know, exit to Lerp, you know. It was great. I was on Barstool Sports. It was funny because they said Jacksonville was on the rise with, well, at the time, with Urban Meyer and Trevor Lawrence, and started going downhill with Tebow and Jeffrey. You know, so it's kind of funny. And then, even before this thing was built, before its design, there was a Lex beer, there's a Lerp keychains, there's Lerp hats, Lerp socks. Even 2 people got tattoos of it. That's how much vested these people were into this. And, you know, even during the Jacksonville game, you know, they started flying, you know, these Lerp banners, You know, I love LERP. You know, it's just, you know, and then this guy built this, I got to go visit this thing. He charges $5 to take a selfie in front of it. But he made his own sculpture, you know, of the LERP, you know? It's like it's great. And then Halloween, there were LERP costumes, you know? So the value of doing things and seeing where you are is really precedent on how much, you know, social media and people grab onto it. And it leads to these other things that I'm doing. Like, for example, I've been selected to honorably do our largest sculpture in my homeland, the Philippines, 24 stories tall, same height as the Statue of Liberty without the podium, 55 meters. It'll have projection mapping on it. It's perforated metal, so we're lighting it from the inside, so you can see the glow within the Filipino, and then also projection mapping on the outside. But when we launched this, even before we broke ground, the developer then was able to land the Shangri-La and the Ritz on the flag next to the hotel next to it, and then Hong Kong Land came next to it to develop their mixed use, and every single brochure shows views of outside their condos with this icon. So you could see how, you know, creating these things, we're past creating that pop-up fountain, right? In parks, you know, and these sort of you know, people are looking for these sort of things that become these iconic natures all over the world. This is it under construction. I know, it's real. Isn't that funny? And then I'm working on the world's largest heart, which is up here on 95. Anyone here from Tradition, Port St. Lucie was a great opportunity to be part of this project. Mattamy, which is a production home builder, you know, they were like, we live in Tradition, put us on the map, you know. And I was like, man, like, so Tradition is really like home where the heart is. And this idea that people come in Tradition, it's kind of Tradition, they do their thing, they go to school and they come back and they build this idea of family. And the idea of creating this giant heart here is amazing sort of concept for them. I'll be honest, I was really saving this for Paris, but, you know, why not Vero Beach?
Simply beautiful.
Jeffrey, I want to thank you literally from the bottom of my heart. And for me, love is just so important. And right now in the world, in society, and the human race of how much little love sometimes we truly should show, I couldn't think of a more poignant time in the world to produce such a beautiful piece. It could be a reflection for people to open the back and say, you know, we have this love.
It says love on there, but it's hard. We'll just see it from here.
I just want to thank you for being here and really taking the time to go through this with us tonight, because it's very important, and this is something we're going to remember for years to come.
So Jeffrey, you have an amazing story, and we're so honored to have one of your...
That's the mayor of Port St. Lucie and the vice mayor.
We truly know that we are a city for all people. And so now, we're going to be a city with a heart for all people. And so how awesome is that?
What more can I say except ditto, and
So the beauty about that sculpture is that it's funny because I went to the city council meeting and there were citizens there complaining about trash and traffic and the things that happen in city council meetings, right? And then this topic came up, and the first thing is wasteful tax spending, right? But then the developer's like, like, no, it's being funded, right? And like, oh, it's the greatest project ever. But it's going to drive traffic to our city, you know. But you can see how the economic development is part of it. And the best thing now we're negotiating with, and I can't really say it out loud, is we're working with a healthcare system now that we're negotiating the naming rights for this heart, so that they actually can claim they have the world's largest heart, right? So you could see the value in terms of this branding. So what's next for me? I've been doing a lot of work in LA. It's crazy how I've been getting into these collaborations I did the crown for Miss World with Tiffany, Miss World USA. This was really breaking down sort of the globe and structure of the world and putting diamonds as part of that. That's me trying to look cool. That's the winner of Miss World. And then I'm working on a lot of collaborations with people. I have no idea who they are, but they've got 155 million followers on Instagram. So I'm working with the Kardashians on a project, Charli D'Amelio. I'm working on sort of the world's largest star, which will be on Hollywood Boulevard. So the idea is that not all of us will get a Hollywood star, but you can take a selfie of you and you'll be in that digital star as part of that when you go to Hollywood Boulevard. And then I just do a lot of work with artists and collabs. So I'll be on the show $1 Million Listings. I'll be in a couple of Bravo TV shows. That's what some of these Real Housewife shows. But I guess that's Hollywood. And then I've been honored, which is great. These astronauts at the end of the year will be the first time I'll have that they will have an exhibit at the Chinese Theater where the handprints are. So I'll have a series of my giant astronauts in Hollywood Boulevard as part of that. And LA just likes to party. So I guess, you know, that first slide I showed you, what we want to be when we grow up, it goes back to this idea that, you know, we don't necessarily have to be in a box, and I don't think a lot of us do. We all are designers. We could do everything that I've shown you here. And for me, like when you see the array of the stuff I'm doing, it makes me reassure that I'm doing the right thing. So thank you very much for coming out. It was really a pleasure speaking to everybody here today. So we have about 15 minutes of question and answers if anyone has any questions. But I do have the first, I think, 30 people or so. I have a free shirt for you guys up here, which are essentially my sculptures with my on the shirts themselves. So, but does anyone have a question? Yeah. Do we have a mic, or are we just going? Okay. Yeah, he's bringing a mic real quick. So. I do want to thank, there's a lot of friends here that I see here in the audience from Orlando and other parts. You know, they knew me when I was Jeffrey Manuel.
Jeffrey, you talked about your schooling, but you never talked about marketing. And you're a brilliant marketer, a brilliant thinker, and a brilliant designer to create these type of iconic images for cities. So your marketing ability is just awesome. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you. I think for me, it's like, I always say there's a lot of amazing designers and architects, and I think what sets people apart really is your ability to communicate the idea, figuring out how to build it, and how to market it, right? I mean, I think it's the same thing that you guys do in architecture, right? But it's those three things, especially now with social media, that I don't know if there's a need for a website anymore. Everyone just looks up your Instagram or Facebook and sees what you're doing, you know? So, because remember, a lot of the developers now, like it's interesting because, I don't know, the Related group, you know, in Miami, right? They, they are now transitioning to the kids, right? JP and those guys. So they are now looking the same peer range of working with the people who understand sort of green technologies or resilience or things like that related to that. So are we passing the, how we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have one quick question for you. So you talked about what happened, obviously your illness and your surgery. And I guess you mentioned you were 35, did I get that right when that happened?
Yeah, I was 35. This past Monday, I turned 50.
Okay.
So it was my birthday.
I'm going to join you in
July
in
25.
a few days. So my question was, beyond the moment of seeing potentially the end, what transpired to make you? Because obviously you had this within you before your heart attack. What or your heart disease, what transpired to get you to be able to realize all these things that you've been able to realize here in such a short period of time?
So time time is short, right? Time is valuable. I learned to say no. And then I chase things that, you know, if they're, and not to sound like I haven't, it sounds like egotistical, but if they're not a postcard to a city, or they're not impacting people's lives, then I don't want to work on it, you know? And in some ways, that's why I hate competitions, I'll be honest. Because I feel like you put all this energy in it, and then you don't know the outcome of it if it will ever get built. Like the Jacksonville thing might take years. The Orlando airport thing is like on hold because of COVID. You know, I think, you know, I'm okay in the private sector, right? But I think cities are starting to realize that, you know, to sort of pool together, because of the ordinances of the 1% for art programs that are out there, if you're going to do art, you might as do it right? And then figure out how to do something that's iconic by pulling things together. I mean, remember, no one was building these things for centuries, right? I mean, a lot of these things were gifts to cities, right? And so for me, it's like I felt like, you know, I mean, I had a big party last weekend, I'll be honest. I mean, I just went all out. I didn't, for me, it's like, you know, when you have that heart attack and triple bypass surgery, the doctor tells you got, you know, 10 or 15 years left, right? You know, but, you know, technology changes, medicine, I'm still taking medicine, right? So even though that's helping my heart, it's hurting other organs of my body, right? And so sometimes I don't know what to do. So for me, it's always chasing things that have a meaning and purpose, or else I just say no, right? And so that's why, you know, not to say go big or go home, that's what I try to do. The worst thing they could say is no. But then you eventually keep saying, knocking on the door, and then eventually these people say, oh, okay, you know. I want one of those, you know. I want the thing you did in Jacksonville. I want the thing you did in Port St. Lucie. I want the thing you did in Philippines. So that portfolio building starts happening. It's just finding that first opportunity, right?
Hi, thanks for sharing your art with us. Can you give us just a sense of what your process is like? What do you kind of go into a hole and get in your head, or is it messy? Kind of give us just a sense of what that might look like.
So it's interesting because, you know, I went to the AA, architecture school in London. Even when I was doing landscape architecture, I was doing process-based work, whereas all site-specific, understanding the context, doing context-based, material-based stuff, and creating objects or materialisms that relate to that particular area. Now, obviously, I'm using stainless steel a lot now because of the structural integrity of these large sculptures. But everything I do, besides my box series, which is my signature now, is always one of a kind. And the biggest reason why I won that first 8 out of 12 in my first year was because I was saying, hey, do you want that's been done in another city? Because a lot of people who were applying were studio artists, which were great. But then, you know, like, I love, like, for example, Janet's work, you know what it is with the fishnets and stuff. But every time I competed against her, I said to the committee, like, why would you want something that's in Boston or St. Pete? Don't you want something original? You know? So for me, it was just evolving this idea of using taxpayers' money to create one-of-a-kind work. And my process is really about exactly the process you would do in architecture, or, well, hopefully you guys do in architecture, but doing, you know, research-based work, right, and experimentation.
Just curious, Jeffrey, your work's extraordinary, but a lot of what you've done are in locations that do not have icons that you're creating. Maybe even LA, but LA is its own world, but have you ever been approached to do anything in New York, which is a city full of icons?
Well, I've been asked many times to do something in Vegas, right? But I felt like, I don't know if I'm not up for the competition, but then I'm going against a lot of other things in Vegas that become, you know, street noise, right? Like it's hard, right? So not that, and large-scale art should not just be in New York or LA or Chicago. Like, why can't it be in Des Moines, Iowa, or Nebraska, or Alabama, you know? To kind of, you know, set these cities and give them a chance. I think Hollywood and I think LA, Chicago, New York are fine on their own, right? So.
Hi, over here. My name is Amy Callisti. I'm really inspired by your art. I'm wondering what was your process in trying a different method or material in your work? Because you jump from metal with cuttings to concrete to large metal tacked sculptures to a bunch of different things. And I'm just wondering, as you're going through the process of developing your concepts to whatever you're applying to, yeah, it's gorgeous. What process do you have in selecting your end product? And if you're jumping into something new, what's your process for kind of figuring out how to go about what you're thinking of proposing?
So a lot of the process-based stuff really is sort of generative of the idea, like for example, like how tall it is, the sort of the form of it. But in terms of materialism, I'll be honest, 80% of the time it's whatever the structural engineer tells me. I mean, that's the reality. It's like you get to a certain scale, even with a sculpture I just did in Orlando that was 40 feet, they made me do full calculations, like for the hand, for everything, the welding joints, and I was like, I can tell you all these sculptures in Orlando don't have any of these calculations, because that cost me 20 grand just to get those calculations done, right? But that's where you are at this point, because it's like life safety, so, right, you don't want anything falling, and have you ever gotten hurt by a sculpture? Morgan and Morgan, so. Yeah, so, we have to be conscious too, so, but, like I said, materialism is really based, that's why I use a lot of stainless steel. It's pliable, stainless, 316L, you could use it closer to the ocean with erosion stuff, so, I'm still, the interesting, as I have that word artist, but, my background is very similar to everybody in this room, right, and I just kind of was able to use that artist name to do whatever I want, so.
Oh my God. Jeffrey, first of all, I mean, what everybody else said, inspiring, phenomenal work. I went to your solo exhibit, just blown away. It was phenomenal. A question is the point of entry for having these discussions. Developers, public officials, you're coming in now as a sought-after artist, but those of us that are trying to encourage these discussions in our communities or on projects, what's the best point of entry?
So even in architecture, even when I was doing landscape architecture, I think we all tried to sneak stuff in, and then and have it be an art component of the building or the landscape. And for me, I learned a lot being a landscape architect, because the first thing that would get value engineered was my work, And all we would have is a nice clean lawn in front of a Ronnie Mateo building. I see Ronnie back there. But the thing is that what I tell people now, because we're in a different era now, right, is that give me 1% of your total capital project, whether it's private or public, because that will be to allow me to help you create the most self-feed thing for that project that will define it, right? It's kind of like you spend a lot of money on signs and all these other things, right? But instead of a sign, like a lot of these projects now don't need a sign because they're defined through the sculpture, right? Like if you have to put a sign in front of your development, you failed. Like people need to know, like, oh my God, the Wall Street Bull that's in Wall Street, right? You need to know these things, and it's hard. I don't know what, for me, I go through a focus group a lot to kind of make sure that people like, what is that? What do you think of that? What do you think? Would you come and visit it? That's really the thing. Would you come for Jacksonville? My whole thing was, I don't care if you call it LERP, DERP, Lex, Love, whatever. As long as you get off of 95 on your way to Atlanta, come downtown, take a selfie, buy a beer, and have a nice dinner at the restaurant, And that's all what really this idea of the art is really to create a magnet. And so in terms of getting how you start that discussion, it depends on what the project is, right? But I think even in the things with the retail stuff where, they become wayfinding elements, we're in that age where people want to go and see these things, like the vessel. And, you'll go there, maybe you'll have go there once, and then maybe you'll have, a $500 dinner for two, but you'll go up there one time, right? And you do it and you experience it, and it's just part of the nature we are, and we're very exploratory people, right? So I think having those conversations of 1%, 1% is not a lot, so.
So I'm going to ask a question, and it's going to go straight to something you and I know about. So I sort of discovered you, so to speak, Jeffrey, when we were doing the Family College of Law. Vince and I were working on that project.
Yes.
And I was just blown away by the fact that you'd done enough research to realize that Virgil Hawkins was the reason the law school came into existence, and you designed a park. And just like you just said, that was the first thing that got, VE'd out. If the money became available today, would you consider redoing that park?
I don't know if I ever go backwards, but I think, I think I would, I think that concept still exists. I think what I would do is I have a better chance now of helping you finance it, just because of my connections with brands now and corporations like the Banks of America or the Advent Healths that want to, put their names on everything, right? I'm sure that happens here. There's a lot of healthcare systems and banks that like to put their naming rights and stuff, so.
I asked that question because, the family still, I'm part of the family, by the way, by marriage. The family still wish to do something about memorializing Uncle Virgil, and so I'll be talking with you.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah, thanks. Tim Johnson's the director of permitting in Orlando, so if you ever need anything permitted, you just put, you give him, what's your favorite food? Just kidding.
In talking about this 1% for art in public projects, have you seen incidents where cities have required at least 1% for art in private projects?
Yeah, I guess in Miami or Coral Gables, if it's over $10 million, they require that. I think, but for me, going back to Dan's original question, I think you have to have that conversation with the owner that, what is that moment? And maybe they don't care, right? But I think art is really something that in today's culture is very important in how people live. And it could be as simple as a mural. It doesn't have to be something iconic, right? But murals, even having a curation program of working with, I love interior designers, but they go in there and just go on, Wayfinder and start buying a bunch of stuff, right? It's like, why not go work with the locals and do a curation process of integrating local art in these buildings, right? And have that be part of the culture of the buildings, even if it's just an office building, right? So,
I'd love to see that, the legislation for that, because I'm not only an architect, but I'm also an elected public official and probably running for mayor in the next election. So I'd love to have that resource to be able to advance this in our community.
Yeah, that's the only way art gets funded, for good or bad, right? So what also happens is the private sector has this option to defer the money into the bank that then they can use later on. But obviously you're going to spend it on your own project if you want to.
Well, if you take it into the idea, they don't get the CO.
Yeah, you don't get the CO. So I'm working, speaking of permitting, I'm working on a project with someone that unless my art goes up on it, they won't get their CO. So, which is a lot of pressure for me, because I'm the guy that's holding up the thing. But I think it's important. I think having that discussion with cities and how you integrate art and how it gets allocated and how it gets funded is an important discussion.
Hey Jeffrey, Chad Wentz. I'm with Little in Orlando and also a resident in Lake Nona, so love all your work out there. The question is, I lead a team and we do mostly work in the private sector, and we're doing headquarter projects and they can range from 50 to 100 plus $1 million. Is there a threshold, the 1%, where, when should we call you? When should we ask if you'd be interested in doing a project, when not, and how about do people get in touch with you? JEFRE_artist is my Instagram. That's my social handle. And then my website is jefre.org, and there's an email site there. But, I'm just busy, which is a good thing. But, I look at opportunities, I look at everything, and and also I'm at a point where if I say, a lot of people say, hey, we like this, how about this? And I said, I might not